I am Ashley Miller, a 30-year-old interior designer in Boston, and last Thursday evening I thought I was returning to the one place I'd always belong. After landing back from my Chicago presentation, with applause still buzzing in my ears, I pulled into my childhood driveway, heart brimming with relief. My mom loved to leave the porch light on for me, and I was already craving the smell of her homemade pumpkin muffins. But instead of the warm glow I'd pictured, my phone pinged with a new voicemail. Hands trembling, I hit play. "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore," my mother's voice said, flat and unyielding. I sat in my car, stunned. The key in my hand felt useless, heavy as regret. 1,000 questions flooded in. Why would they do this? Had I done something unforgivable? My breath hitched as I stared at the dark windows of the house I grew up in, now an enemy fortress. That moment, right there on Route 128, was the spark that ignited every fear I'd ever tried to outrun, and it was only the beginning of my nightmare. I still remember the first time Grandma Eleanor taught me how to bake her famous cinnamon-spiced pumpkin muffins in that warm, sunlit kitchen. It was a crisp October afternoon, the air tinged with wood smoke from the fireplace and the sweet promise of autumn. I was 8 years old, standing on a wooden stool that creaked under my weight, eagerly cracking eggs into the mixing bowl. Grandma, her silver hair pulled back into a loose bun, her floral print apron dusted with flour, smiled at me through wire-rimmed glasses and said, "Ashley, baking is part science, part love. Get the measurements right, but don't forget to stir in your heart." I nodded solemnly, my small hands trembling as I swirled the batter until it glowed the color of sunset. Our house on Elm Street was a 3-story Victorian with wraparound porches, gingerbread trim, and bay windows stuffed full of potted ferns. It had been in our family for generations, built by my great-great-grandfather in 1892, passed down to my grandmother before it became my parents' domain. Every corner held a story. In the parlor there was a faded oil painting of Grandma as a young woman, her smile bright and certain. In the formal dining room, an oak sideboard displayed her hand-embroidered table linens. Delicate white work she taught me to stitch one summer when I was 12. On stormy nights, my siblings and I would pile onto the Chase lounge by the fireplace, listening to her read from Dickens or Twain, her voice rising and falling like waves. Thanksgiving at Grandma's was the highlight of the year. Each November, we'd travel from our separate lives, Boston, Providence, New York City, to converge beneath her roof. The day always started before dawn. Grandma up at 4:30, eating, water boiling in the turkey roaster, cinnamon sticks clattering in sugar buckets, and me trailing behind her to fetch ingredients. My mother, though strict about proper table settings and resin-polished silverware, softened in those moments, sharing secret smiles with Grandma as we kneaded dough for dinner rolls. I loved watching the kitchen come alive, the deep red of the cranberry sauce bubbling in the simmer pot, the golden glow of squash ribbons roasting on the rack, the dough rising like pillows in the humid warmth of the oven. Grandma let me scrape spoons clean, then taught me how to place perfectly sized mounds of pie filling onto latticed crusts. "Patience," she'd whisper, "bake with purpose." By noon the house smelled like an orchard in harvest, apples, cinnamon, nutmeg, and the faint smoke of burning oak. After dinner, we'd sit around the massive mahogany table, my parents, my 2 older brothers, my little sister, and me, giving thanks one by one. When it was my turn, I always hesitated because I felt overwhelmed by everything I loved, the food, the laughter, the safe cocoon of family. But Grandma would catch my eye and nod, and I'd say, "I'm grateful for this house, for you, Grandma, for knowing that love can be baked right into a muffin." She'd squeeze my hand and my heart would swell. Summer weekends were just as magical. I'd drive down from Boston on Friday afternoons, the highway stretching ahead like a ribbon. I'd park in the gravel driveway, the tall pines swaying overhead, and step inside to the familiar creak of the front door. Grandma would be in her sunroom, watering her orchids, and I'd slip onto the wrought iron bench beside her, leaning in to inhale the sweet orchid scent mingled with the pine. We'd sip iced tea and watch hummingbirds dart in and out of the fuchsia blossoms hanging from the porch eaves. Those summers, Grandma taught me the language of design. She'd point to the scalloped trim on the porch and tell me how she insisted on restoring it after the hurricane of '98. She showed me how to pick color palettes that complemented the natural light, how to balance form and function in furniture placement. A home, she told me, should comfort the soul before it dazzles the eye. Little did I know that those lessons would shape my career as an interior designer and fuel the passion I poured into every project. On one particularly radiant afternoon when I was 16, Grandma handed me a weathered leather-bound journal. Inside were her notes, sketches of paisley-matted curtains she'd sewn, mock-ups of wallpaper layouts, and meticulous measurements of every room in the house. She said, "You'll need this someday, Ashley. I want you to know how much thought went into every corner." I pressed the journal to my chest and promised her I'd treasure it always. High school graduation brought mixed emotions. I was thrilled to leave Salem for Boston University, eager to study fine arts and design. But leaving Grandma's house felt like stepping away from the safety net that had cradled my entire childhood. She handed me a small lockbox before I drove off. Inside was a brass key, stamped Eleanor's Studio, and a note that read, "For whenever you need to find your way back." I tucked it into my backpack, tears prickling my eyes, and drove away with a promise to visit every break. Those college years were a flurry of late-night study sessions, apartment hunting, and internship interviews. But every break in autumn, winter, and spring, I'd come home. That old Victorian welcomed me back with its groaning floorboards, its aromatic pantry, and a hug from Grandma that smelled of lavender and love. We'd spend hours in her studio, once the formal dining room, where she taught me upholstery techniques and introduced me to mid-century modern lines. I sewed slipcovers for her heirloom chairs and curated color swatches for her newly painted accent walls. In those moments, I felt complete. After I graduated and landed my first job at a boutique design firm in Boston, Grandma threw a small celebration in her sunroom, candles flickering in the dusk. My parents were there, despite their busy schedules, and my brothers and sister joined via video call. I brought cupcakes from a local bakery and recited a speech about gratitude and ambition. Grandma's eyes glistened as she placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You've made me proud, Ashley. Now go make your own legacy." Yet even as I built my career, winning accolades, expanding my portfolio, purchasing my first condo, I clung to the belief that Elm Street was my true anchor. That wraparound porch, those bay windows, the smell of pine and pumpkin all signaled home. Whenever I hit a creative block in Boston, when a client's budget clashed with their expectations or a lighting plan fell short, I'd retreat to that childhood memory, Grandma showing me how to blend complementary hues, or the way autumn light slanted through the staircase window at exactly 4 p.m. I trusted that connection so completely I never questioned it. Then, 2 weeks before my 30th birthday, and a day before I was due to sign a lease on a new studio apartment, I flew to Chicago for that high-profile design conference. It was my biggest speaking engagement yet, a keynote on heritage homes, modern solutions. I'd spent months refining my presentation, practicing transitions until they were seamless. Grandma called the night before I flew out, her voice crackling through the line. "Remember, dear," she said, "no matter where you go, this house holds a part of you." I laughed, told her I'd bring souvenirs, and promised to FaceTime her after my talk. Standing on that stage in Chicago, the lights bright and the audience hushed, I invoked the story of Grandma's Victorian home as the ultimate case study in preserving history with fresh design. I felt invincible, until my phone buzzed mid-speech with a text from my mother. "Call me when you land." I ignored it, chalked it up to last-minute logistics, and finished my talk to a standing ovation. Afterward, backstage, as I was congratulated by peers, my phone rang. It was Grandma's number. My heart leapt. I answered with, "Hi, Grandma," but all I heard was silence and a faint rustling. Then I saw a voicemail notification. I listened, my smile fading with each word. "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore." In that instant, the warm, glowing memories of every autumn afternoon and festive holiday at Elm Street, tangled with confusion and fear, the safe haven I'd known my entire life, felt irrevocably altered. My pulse hammered, as if those walls I adored were crumbling from the inside out. And as I sat in my Chicago hotel room afterward, the journal Grandma gave me resting on the nightstand, I realized that the past I'd treasured was slipping through my fingers, and I had no idea what would happen next. I landed back in Boston on that Monday morning, dragging my suitcase through Logan Airport with my phone clenched in my hand as if it were a lifeline. My keynote in Chicago had been a triumph, $75,000 USD worth of new client contracts dangling on the horizon. But my mind was a whirlpool of anxiety. I kept telling myself it had to be a misunderstanding. My mother would call, explain everything, and I'd laugh it off. But the day drifted past without a single message. I retreated to my tiny home office in South Boston and forced myself to review the slide deck for a fintech startup whose project I was spearheading. They'd promised to double their workspace efficiency with my redesign, and I couldn't afford to let them down. Still, every time my phone buzzed, my heart lurched. By 6:00 p.m., I finally received a text from Mom. "Ash, we need to talk. Come home when you can." 6 words that felt like a guillotine drop. I texted back, "Okay, 8 p.m., and my throat closed around the send. Driving onto Elm Street, nostalgia washed over me. The scent of lavender from Mom's garden, the familiar creak of the iron gate, but inside I found only a hushed tension. My mother, Diane, sat in the living room, with the velvet drapes I'd personally designed spread out on her lap. Her eyes were distant as she tapped her fingernail on the fabric sample. $3,200, she began quietly. "That's how much those curtains cost. Your father nearly choked when he saw the invoice. We're still paying off the Tesla loan, $12,000 USD left on that." I blinked. "Mom, I negotiated the price down from $4,500 USD to $3,200 USD. It's linen sourced from Europe, top quality, and the client's budget covers it." She sighed. "You always think your client's money is endless. This is our family home, Ashley, not one of your contracts." My chest tightened. I explained how the startup's leadership believed their team's performance would jump 20% with a well-designed environment, how this project was the first big win of my independent career. But she barely nodded, as if I were lecturing on something trivial. I left that evening with more questions than answers. In the following days, the little red flags began to pile up. A random message from Dad: "Have you arranged for the backyard landscaping? If not, I'll hire service at $150 a visit." And a midweek email from Mom titled "Home Budget Overview" with an Excel sheet breaking down every single household expense, from the $1,200 roof repair to the $850 quarterly cleaning fee, each line item annotated with sharp commentary. A casual remark: "Why on earth did you choose subway tile for the kitchen backsplash? That trend peaked years ago." I remembered the family dinner 6 months ago when I'd pitched a $18,500 USD sunroom renovation to Dad and Mom. I'd even offered to chip in $7,000 USD of my own money. They'd shot me down cold. At the time, I swallowed my disappointment. Now, I realized I'd been too accommodating. Then came the invitation from Aunt Patricia. Meet me at Black Sheep Coffee in Cambridge at 3 p.m. It's about Grandma's will. Patricia rarely reached out without legal pretext. My gut clenched. I answered, "I'll be there." At the cafe, the hum of espresso machines undercut our hushed urgency. Patricia, her lined forehead creased with worry, slid a latte across the table. "Your parents are worried Grandma's trust could be contested. They've been advised to amend the will to reduce your share to 10%. My chest went cold. 10%? But Grandma left me a quarter of the house, her way of ensuring I'd always have a place to return. Patricia leaned in. "They're talking to lawyers. There's a draft amendment circulating right now." I stumbled out of the cafe into the dying afternoon light, visions of a newly rewritten will erasing my inheritance flashing before me. Grandma had set aside $250,000 USD for the house restoration, 20 years she'd saved for that fund, and now it was in jeopardy overnight. Back on Elm Street, the pile of mail by the front door told the tale. A thick packet stamped Pro-Spoke Trust Amendment from Boston and Partners on Beacon Street. My hands shook as I tore it open and scanned the pages of legalese. It spelled out reallocation of assets, insertion of new beneficiaries, removal of me as co-trustee. I couldn't read further. My vision blurred. I sank onto the emerald green sofa, the very spot Grandma once read me Dickens, and let the reality of betrayal wash over me. That night, I dialed my brother Jason, 32, marketing director in San Francisco, living on a six-figure salary. "Jason, have Mom and Dad said anything to you about this amendment?" I asked, voice quivering. He paused. "They mentioned a trust review. But it's none of my business. I'm not even on the East Coast." His detachment stung. He offered to book a flight for the weekend, but his "I'll be there soon" rang hollow. I lay awake, listening to the ceiling fan whirl, haunted by the thought that my own family was stripping me of my birthright. The following morning, as dawn's light filtered through the bay windows, I found another envelope, this one sent overnight bearing Boston and Partners logo. Inside, a terse letter. "Please contact our office immediately regarding your family trust. This matter is time-sensitive." My pulse thundered. The document's subtext was clear. If I didn't respond, the amendment would sail through unchallenged. Standing in that hushed hallway, I realized I was facing a test far more personal than any design competition. It wasn't just a contract I had to negotiate, it was the legacy my grandmother entrusted to me. The first signs of trouble had arrived as whispers, a curt text, a budget spreadsheet, a secret coffee date, and now a lawyer's demand. Each one chipped away at my certainty, but they also ignited a fire I didn't know I had. I knew then that I couldn't retreat into my Chicago triumphs or my Boston projects. I had to fight, legally, emotionally, and strategically, to protect what was mine. And so, with trembling resolve, I dialed the number on that lawyer's letter. "Hello, this is Ashley Miller. I'd like to schedule a consultation today." Because nothing would ever be the same again. I woke before dawn that Saturday, driven by restless anxiety and the nagging thought that I couldn't afford to waste another minute. Boston's skyline was just a faint silhouette against the indigo sky as I slipped into my sneakers and grabbed my keys. The letter from Boston and Partners had sat on my kitchen counter all night. Time-sensitive trust amendment. My chest tightened whenever I thought of it. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I arrived at Elm Street by 6:30 a.m. The street lamp glow spilled onto wet pavement, last night's drizzle clinging to my hair. I parked at the curb and stared at the Victorian house that had sheltered me for 30 years. In the cold morning air, the place looked unfamiliar, almost foreboding. I approached the front door with trepidation, phone in hand to record everything, and tested my brass key in the lock. It wouldn't turn. My breath hitched. I jiggled the key, twisted harder, but the deadbolt didn't budge. Leaning in, I peered at the lock mechanism and saw fresh scratches around the keyhole. Panic welled in my throat. Fingertips trembling, I knocked on the door, once, twice, calling out, "Mom? Dad?" Silence. Only the hollow echo of my voice answered. I circled to the side gate, heart pounding so loudly I was certain the neighbors could hear it. The gate latch was also jammed. I climbed up onto the low brick wall, pulled myself over and landed in the backyard's overgrown grass. The sliding glass door was barred from the inside, and the windows, my grandmother's beloved lead stained glass, were dark and impenetrable. A heavy dread settled in my stomach. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a budget dispute anymore. This was premeditated. They had literally locked me out of my own home. Determined to find some entry point, I circled the perimeter. That's when I noticed a pile of my things dumped behind the hedge by the garage. A battered suitcase, my old rolling pin still dusted with flour, a photo collage of Grandma and me on her 85th birthday. They were strewn on the damp ground, half buried in mud. My breath caught, and I blinked back tears. I sank to my knees and reached for the photo collage. It was smeared with smudged ink. One picture showed Grandma teaching me to knead dough. Another had us sharing hot cocoa on the porch. I had framed it last Christmas for them. Now it lay desecrated. I clutched the edge of the frame, wincing as the glass cracked under my grip. Seething, I called my father's cell. No answer. Then my mother's, went straight to voicemail. I left a voice message as calm as I could manage. "This is Ashley. I'm outside. Please come home and explain what's going on." I hung up, but the anger burned hotter than the cold night air. I stepped back and surveyed the scene. A single yellow-orange street lamp made everything look harsh and unreal. My childhood home reduced to a fortress that rejected me. I felt the weight of betrayal like a physical blow, and I sank against the hedge, chest heaving. Then I heard footsteps on the driveway. My father appeared under the halo of the porch light, shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. He didn't look at me, he kept his gaze fixed on the ground. My mother followed, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I stood and confronted them. "Why are you doing this?" My voice cracked. "Why would you throw out my life's memories and lock me out?" My mother folded her arms tighter. "Ashley, you heard the voicemail," she said evenly. "The house needs repairs, estimated at $35,000 after the last storm. We can't afford it on top of your so-called renovations and your half-baked projects." I blinked. "The house fund is separate? Grandma left $250,000 in trust specifically for restoration. You tapped into it without telling me?" My father finally looked up, guilt flickering in his eyes. "We needed the money, Ash. Your mother's medical bills have piled up. Last quarter insurance covered only 60% of her treatment, leaving us with $8,500 out of pocket." My heart ached at that admission, yet I couldn't forgive what they'd done. "So you decide to evict me instead of talking to me? You changed the locks and dumped my things like trash?" My mother's lips quivered. "We didn't want to fight. You've been unreachable. Emails, texts, none of it made sense. We thought it would be easier if you moved out, started fresh in Boston. Your condo lease is up next month, isn't it?" I shook my head in disbelief. "You assumed you could erase me from this house and my grandmother's legacy. You never gave me a chance to explain or help with expenses." For a long moment, none of us said anything. The silence rang louder than any argument. My father rubbed his hands together, avoiding eye contact. Finally, he murmured, "We're sorry, Ash. We thought we were protecting you from more debt. We didn't realize how much this house meant to you." My jaw tightened. Protecting me? From a debt I didn't create? You used Grandma's money without my consent. You handed me a mailed eviction notice instead of a conversation. That's not protection, that's betrayal. My mother's shoulders slumped, tears brimming in her eyes. My father reached out, as if to touch my arm, but drew back. "Ashley, please. Let's talk this through. We can make a plan." I lifted a hand to stop him. "No, not now." Turning away, I retrieved my photo collage from the hedge, clutching it to my chest. Every cherished memory felt tainted by their actions. "I'm staying with Sarah tonight," I said, referring to my friend's loft in Cambridge. "And tomorrow morning, I'm calling my lawyer." They watched me pack my suitcase in the cold light, my grandmother's journal, my design portfolios, even the brass key she'd given me for Eleanor's studio. When I turned to leave, my mother whispered, "I love you," but her voice was uncertain, fragile. I didn't answer, I just walked away, footsteps echoing down the front walk. Behind me, the house loomed silent and impassive. I felt hollow, as if I'd left a piece of my soul behind on that porch. By the time I reached Sarah's place an hour later, I was trembling. She threw her arms around me the moment I stepped inside. "Oh my God, Ash," she said. "What happened?" I sank onto her couch, exhausted. Through tears, I recounted every detail: the voicemail, the locks, the dumped belongings, the confrontation. Sarah's face hardened with righteous anger as I spoke. When I finished, she pressed her hand to my cheek and said, "You're not alone. We'll fight this." That night, between sobs and caffeine-fueled rage, I sketched a plan. Contact Boston and Partners, gather financial records, find the original trust documents, and petition the court for emergency access to the house fund. I would need witnesses: Sarah, Aunt Patricia, even Jason if he'd cooperate. I vowed to myself that I would not be erased from my own legacy. As I lay in Sarah's guest room, the moonlight cutting across the floorboards, I felt a fierce clarity harden within me. The betrayal had been brutal, personal, and irrevocable, but it had also lit a fire in me I never knew existed. I closed my eyes and whispered into the darkness, "You can't lock me out of my grandmother's love or my own history. This house, my heritage, will never belong to anyone but me." And in that moment I realized this was no longer just about a house. It was about respect, identity, and the unbreakable bond of family, even when family wounds you the deepest. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready to fight with every ounce of heart I had. Tomorrow the real war would begin. I forced myself to drive away from Elm Street before dawn, though every fiber of me wanted to turn the car around and beg my parents for forgiveness or understanding. The sky was still ink black when I pulled into Sarah's driveway in Cambridge, headlights carving out pools of light on the wet pavement. My hands trembled so badly that I fumbled with the door handle. When Sarah flung the door open, she found me soaked, tears streaming down my cheeks, mascara running in dark rivulets. She wordlessly led me inside and wrapped me in her oversized cardigan. I sagged against her chest, as if I'd been carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. The moment I sat on her couch, the dam broke. I heaved in sharp sobs, clutching the stained photo collage to my heart, willing the memories to comfort me. But they felt tainted now. Reminders of a home that had rejected me. My whole body shook. I felt empty, hollowed out from the inside. The realization crashed over me that the people who were supposed to protect me, my own parents, had chosen to lock me out of my grandmother's house, to rewrite the trust that commemorated her love. I felt abandoned and small, like a child again, standing on that wooden stool in Grandma Eleanor's kitchen, clueless about the harshness the world could deliver. I couldn't stop the images flooding my mind. The jarring voicemail in Chicago, the Excel spreadsheets laced with passive-aggressive notes, the draft amendment pages with their cold legal jargon. Worst of all was the sight of my memories dumped in the mud, those symbols of my childhood desecrated by the people who owned them. My breathing was ragged, every inhale stabbed at my chest. I tried to organize my thoughts, to rein in the panic, but grief and rage were tangled so tightly inside me that every attempt to think clearly was like swimming through molasses. I paced the living room, reciting my grandmother's advice: bake with purpose, stir in your heart. But how could I bake anything now, when even my heart felt bruised beyond recognition? Sarah brought me a mug of chamomile tea and sat beside me. She didn't ask me to stop crying, she simply let me unravel. After what felt like hours, I sank back into the cushions, exhausted of tears but still drained of strength. My reflection in the coffee table's black surface looked like a ghost. Puffy eyes, puffy, pale, slumped in defeat. I don't even recognize myself anymore, I whispered. I feel like I've lost everything I thought defined me: my home, my family's faith in me, my grandmother's legacy. Sarah placed her hand over mine. You haven't lost you, Ash. You're still here, and you still have the right to fight for what's yours. Her words were gentle, but they barely penetrated the haze of my despair. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me: the smell of wood smoke in Grandma's sunroom, the feel of that leather-bound design journal in my hands, the way her eyes sparkled when she praised my first upholstery project. Those memories once filled me with warmth. Now they felt like shards of glass in my chest. I needed to feel something other than hurt. I needed an anchor. I scooped up Grandma's journal from my suitcase and flipped through its pages, tracing the sketches and annotations she had made decades ago. Each line was her voice, precise measurements, margin notes in her neat cursive, reminders like balance the light source and don't rush the steamer. I pressed it to my cheek, closing my eyes. Then I read her final entry in a shaky hand. To Ashley, my dearest. May you always find your way home, no matter where life takes you. My lip trembled as I realized. Grandma's definition of home was not just those 4 walls on Elm Street. It was the love she poured into that journal, the lessons she passed down in each stitch and sketch. Home was something I carried inside me. I let that thought settle as slowly as the last leaves of autumn drifting to the ground outside. For the first time since the voicemail, I felt a spark of something besides anguish, a fragile glimmer of resolve. If my grandmother's legacy lived in her words and her teachings, then no lock or legal amendment could erase it. But despite that determination stirring in my chest, I was still utterly drained. My limbs felt leaden, each movement required effort. I curled into a fetal position on the couch, clutching the journal like a lifeline. Sleep claimed me before I could fight it, and in my dreams, the house on Elm Street faded in and out, sometimes a sanctuary, sometimes a battlefield. When I woke, morning light was gathering on the window panes. Sarah was already up, tiptoeing around making breakfast. Eggs, toast, and the sweet tang of homemade marmalade. I sat at the kitchen counter, head in my hands, listening to the sizzle of the skillet. Eat something, Sarah urged. You need energy. I picked at the eggs but barely tasted them. My mind raced with the checklist of what I had to do next. Call Boston and Partners, locate the original trust documents, reach out to Aunt Patricia for more proof, draft an email to Jason to see if he'd testify on my behalf. Each task felt monumental, but they were the only way forward. After breakfast, I retreated to Sarah's small home office and opened my laptop. My inbox had already filled with a terse email from the law firm's assistant. We have an opening at 2 p.m. today. Please confirm you can attend in person. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could feel the adrenaline slowly trickling back into my veins, the same rush I felt before stepping onto a stage or pitching a design proposal. But this was more personal. The stakes were my dreams and my family's legacy. I took a deep breath and typed back, "Yes, I will be there at 2 p.m. In the moments before hitting send, I closed my eyes and pictured Grandma's gentle smile, recalling her words, "Get the measurements right, but don't forget to stir in your heart." I realized that I needed to bring more than just legal arguments to court. I needed to bring her spirit, her purpose, and the love she baked into every muffin and every room she restored. Hitting send felt like lighting a match in the dark. The email whooshed away, and with it disappeared a bit of my fear. I pushed back from the desk, feeling a solidarity with the confident interior designer who had once commanded meeting rooms and client presentations. She was still in there, battered, yes, but unbroken. I texted Mom and Dad. "I'm meeting with the trust attorney today. I hope we can talk after. Ash." I hesitated, then added, "I love you," even though I wasn't sure if they deserved it. As I grabbed my coat and keys, I looked around Sarah's home. A place I'd always considered my friend's pad, but that morning felt almost like my own sanctuary. The walls were lined with her graphic prints. The rays of sunlight fell just so on her drafting table. In that moment, I understood that home could be wherever I felt safe to rebuild. I took one last breath, squared my shoulders, and stepped into the crisp Cambridge air. My heart still throbbed with the ache of betrayal, but beneath it was a hardened resolve. I was no longer just a grieving daughter. I was the executor of my grandmother's legacy, the defender of her trust, and the author of my own future. And as I drove toward Beacon Street, where Boston and Partners awaited, I whispered under my breath, "I'm coming for what's mine." Every inch, every memory, every stitch of my grandmother's love. I woke before sunrise again, but this time it wasn't dread that yanked me from sleep, it was determination. My meeting with Boston and Partners was in 2 hours, and I needed to steel myself. As I dressed in a crisp blouse and dark slacks, I felt the weight of Grandma's journal in my tote bag, alongside the legal packet and my laptop. Today I wasn't just a betrayed daughter, I was a client ready to fight for her inheritance. Sarah drove me to Beacon Street, and we arrived at the law firm's polished marble lobby just as the doors unlocked. The receptionist greeted me by name and led me to a glass-paneled conference room where a sharply tailored attorney, Ms. Reynolds, waited with a sympathetic smile. "Miller, I've reviewed the proposed amendment. It's thinly veiled undue influence. Your parents are citing fabricated financial concerns to cut you out of Grandma's trust," she said, tapping the amendment's cover with a silver stylus. I exhaled. "I need to stop this amendment before it's executed, and I need access to the trust funds for the house restoration, as Grandma intended." Miss Reynolds nodded. "We'll file for an injunction today. You'll get emergency relief to block any changes until a full hearing. But we'll need concrete evidence of Grandma's original intent and proof of undue influence." That afternoon I walked out with a temporary restraining order against the amendment and an appointment for a hearing in 2 weeks. For the first time since the voicemail in Chicago, I felt a cautious hope budding. On the drive back to Cambridge, I replayed everything I'd learned. The cold spreadsheet, the sly suggestion from Aunt Patricia about amending the will, the dumped belongings. I needed more. A smoking gun, proof that Grandma had deliberately protected me against exactly this scenario. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Patricia. "Meet me at my place in 2 hours. I've found something important." My pulse quickened. 2 hours later, I rang Patricia's doorbell in her Cambridge townhouse. She ushered me into her cozy study, walls lined with books and family photos. On her desk lay an unmarked USB drive and a stack of old letters in Grandma's handwriting. Before Grandma died, she recorded a protected voicemail, direct instructions on how to manage the trust if she passed. I transcribed it, Patricia said, passing me the letters. I slid on a pair of headphones, inserted the USB into my laptop and clicked play. Grandma's voice, fragile but determined, filled the room. To my dearest Ashley, this is Grandma Eleanor. If you hear this, I have gone home before you. Know that this house and the $250,000 fund are for you. To preserve our family heritage. Should anyone try to alter my wishes, you have my full blessing to contest it fiercely. You are the keeper of our memories and legacy. Keep your heart strong. Tears blurred my vision. The protected voicemail had been hidden in a secure folder Aunt Patricia only accessed after legal wrangling. I pressed replay. Grandma continued, I trust your judgment as an interior designer and as my granddaughter. Do not let fear or family politics rob you of what is rightfully yours. I love you. I pressed stop. The room was still, and I felt a mixture of grief, love, and an ember of courage igniting into flames. I floated the USB drive toward Patricia. This is exactly what we need, I whispered. I also found notes she passed to her lawyer in 2018, Patricia added, pulling a manila folder from her drawer. Inside were letters from Grandma's attorney outlining her instructions, that I was to receive 25% of the house and full control over the restoration fund. My heart thundered. With this, I said, picking up the letters, we have irrefutable proof of her intent. That evening, back at Sarah's, I laid out the evidence. The injunction, Grandma's voicemail transcript, the attorney's letters. Sarah watched me organize the packets with wide eyes. Ash, this is powerful, she said. Grandma's voice will carry more weight than any spreadsheet. I emailed the materials to Ms. Reynolds and confirmed our strategy for the hearing. Present the original trust, the protected voicemail, the attesting letters, and demonstrate my parents' undue influence. By bedtime, I had a clear roadmap. Before drifting off, I opened Grandma's journal one more time. Under a margin note on architectural intent, she had scribbled, Ashley, you'll need to stand firm someday. Follow your heart and these measurements. I traced the ink with my finger and whispered, I will, Grandma, I promise. The next morning, I felt renewed energy coursing through me. I drafted an email to my brother Jason, detailing the evidence and inviting him to testify about the phone calls and conversations he'd witnessed. He responded within minutes. Ash, please send everything to me. I'll drop everything to help. Love you. I smiled for the first time in days. My family, even fractured, was rallying behind me. Over the following days, I dove into preparation. I met with Ms. Reynolds to review courtroom procedure, practiced my testimony in front of Sarah, and coordinated with Patricia to subpoena the voicemail logs and trust documentation. My social media feed filled with supportive messages from colleagues and friends, boosting my morale. On the eve of the hearing, I sat at my drafting table under the warm glow of the lamp, assembling a mood board that combined family photos, architectural plans, and snippets from Grandma's journal. It was a visual manifesto of why this house and the fund mattered not just legally but emotionally. When I placed the last photo of Grandma and me side by side with a snippet from her voicemail transcript, I felt a surge of conviction. That night, I slept deeply, dreams filled with Grandma's laughter echoing through the sunroom, not with chaos or betrayal. When I arrived at the court the next morning, I was no longer trembling. Clad in my confidence suit and armed with irrefutable proof, I felt my grandmother's presence beside me. As Ms. Reynolds opened our brief, I closed my eyes for a moment and heard Grandma's voice. Keep your heart strong. I walked to the witness stand knowing that this was my fight. And my triumph, sparked by a hidden recording, fueled by love and guided by the very lessons Grandma had baked into every muffin and margin note. The recovery spark she'd ignited would blaze into my victory. That morning, I woke with my heart pounding not from fear but from determination. The drive to the Suffolk County Courthouse felt strangely empowering as I clutched Grandma's journal in one hand and the injunction papers in the other. When I stepped into the wood-paneled courtroom, my parents sat stiffly beside their attorney, faces pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. Opposite them, Ms. Reynolds arranged our exhibits, the original 2015 trust, the attorney's letters confirming Grandma's intent, and the USB drive containing her protected voicemail. As the bailiff played that recording, Grandma's gentle voice insisting I contest it fiercely if anyone tried to alter her wishes, I felt every doubt melt away. When it was my turn, I stood and spoke clearly, recalling how I'd returned from Chicago to find passive-aggressive spreadsheet emails, the draft trust amendment, and finally, my possessions dumped in the mud. I described the agony of being locked out and the heartbreak of seeing my grandparents' memories treated like trash. Judge Murray's steady gaze and the nods of understanding from the courtroom gallery reminded me I was not alone. The moment Judge Murray granted our injunction, freezing any changes to the trust and restoring my status as co-trustee, I felt an exhilarating rush of vindication. Tears welled in my eyes as I thanked the court, and Ms. Reynolds gave me a discreet thumbs up. Outside, on the courthouse steps, bathed in afternoon sunlight, a local reporter from the Boston Globe approached me, recorder in hand. I shared a brief statement that justice had reaffirmed my grandmother's clear, unambiguous wishes, and that I intended to honor her legacy by restoring the house she loved. Within hours, my story was splashed across social media under headlines like "Designer Granddaughter Blocks Trust Amendment," and supportive messages flooded in, friends, colleagues, even contractors offering discounted labor for the restoration. Buoyed by that momentum, I hosted an impromptu Instagram Live right there on the courthouse steps. Cradling Grandma's journal, I laid out the three-phase plan. $50,000, 0 cents for structural repairs, $120,000, 0 cents for Victorian-style interiors, and $80,000, 0 cents for landscaping and decor, all funded by the $250,000, 0 cents restoration fund. Over 5,000 viewers tuned in, sending hearts and sharing their own stories of family strife. Meanwhile, my fintech client, the one I'd feared I'd let down, emailed to extend our $75,000 0 cents contract by another $30,000 0 cents, saying they were inspired by my tenacity. By evening, I had volunteered teams of historians, stonemasons, and fellow designers ready to pitch in. 2 days later, I returned to Elm Street clutching the court order. My parents met me at the gate holding a neatly packed box of my belongings. Their eyes brimmed with contrition as they apologized, acknowledging the pain they'd caused. I showed them the judge's ruling and explained how the injunction ensured Grandma's wishes would be honored. They stepped aside to let me back in, and I crossed the threshold, not as an intruder but as a rightful co-owner. That weekend, we gathered neighbors and volunteers for a groundbreaking gathering on the front lawn. Clinking mugs of pumpkin-spiced cider in Grandma's honor, we celebrated the start of a community bad restoration worth nearly $400,000, 0 cents in labor and materials. Watching the masons shore up the foundation and the painters scout colors, I realized I had indeed turned the tables. The house that once rejected me was now the centerpiece of a collective recovery, its walls echoing not with betrayal, but with the promise of renewal. I'll never forget how Sarah's loyalty and creativity kept me grounded when everything felt like it was unraveling. One rainy Thursday evening, just 2 days after the injunction, I slipped into her Cambridge loft, still buzzing from the courtroom victory. My hands trembled as I set down Grandma's journal and legal briefs, and Sarah immediately ushered me to her drafting table where she'd laid out a surprise, a giant pinboard titled Project Elm Street. She'd printed photos of the Victorian house, scanned sketches from Grandma's journal, and tacked fabric swatches that perfectly matched the original parlor curtains. In the center, she'd pinned a Polaroid of Grandma and me, smiling with flour-dusted aprons. Around the edges, she'd scribbled motivational quotes, "Preserve the past, design the future," and "Strength isn't born from comfort," in her crisp calligraphy. I sank into her swivel chair, tears brimming again, but this time out of gratitude. Sarah twisted around to face me, her eyes bright. "Ash, I wanted you to see that you're not rebuilding this alone. Every piece of history Grandma left you, you'll weave it into something new and beautiful." That evening, Sarah walked me through her own design rescue story. She told me about the rundown barn studio she inherited from her parents last year, a place they'd slated for demolition because of safety concerns. Instead of giving up, Sarah hosted a community build, recruited volunteer carpenters, and turned it into a collaborative art space where local makers could exhibit work. Within months, the barn became a creative incubator, attracting press and funding. She paused, tapping a pastel swatch against the photo of my porch, and said, "Your heritage home can be like my barn, dangerous at first glance but full of potential if you bring people in." Her side story reminded me that restoration wasn't just about bricks and mortar, it was a catalyst for connection. Sarah had organized pop-up workshops in that barn, from pottery classes to poetry slams, and she'd collected over $3,000 in donations for local arts programs. I realized I could do something similar with our Elm Street project, document the process, host neighborhood open houses, and invite design students to learn about heritage preservation. Sarah also shared a bonus insight I hadn't considered: architectural storytelling. She sketched a simple timeline on graph paper, marking key moments: 1892, house built, 1935, sunroom added, 1960, Grandma's major renovation, 2025, Ashley's restoration, and suggested we incorporate those dates into the house itself. Imagine a custom stained glass panel in the entryway inscribed with those milestones, or a kitchen backsplash mosaic featuring the sunroom's original floor plan. Her energy was infectious. By the end of the night, we had drafted a community outreach plan. 1. Heritage Open Day. Invite neighbors for guided tours of the work site. Attendance goal 100 people. 2. Design Workshop Series. Host 4 monthly workshops in the barn-like sunroom, teaching furniture restoration and basic upholstery, targeting 20 students per session. 3. Digital Story Map. Create an online timeline with archival photos and video interviews, aiming for 500 unique visitors in the first month. I left Sarah's loft with my spirit rekindled. Her side story of the barn had shown me how personal loss could spark collective creativity. Her bonus insight, embedding storytelling into the architecture, gave me a fresh perspective on how to honor Grandma's legacy beyond legal victories and construction plans. That night, as I drifted to sleep, I dreamt of the restored sunroom, warm light filtering through a stained glass timeline, neighbors sipping cider on the porch, and me, surrounded by community, baking pumpkin muffins in Grandma's kitchen once more. It was more than a renovation. It was a revival of everything Grandma taught me about home, heart, and heritage. By the time the temporary injunction hit the courthouse docket, word of my legal victory had spread like wildfire across social media. My parents, who once wielded spreadsheets and voicemail threats, found themselves under a spotlight they never anticipated. 2 days after the hearing, I woke to alerts: 47 Elm Street trending locally under Grandma's house, and my mother's name autocorrecting in news feeds. Their carefully constructed image of a concerned, budget-conscious family was unraveling in public view. It began on Facebook. My mother's personal profile, previously set to private, suddenly had over 2,300 new friend requests and 1,100 follower notifications. By midday, she made a panicked post: I owe everyone an apology. In my fear over medical bills and repairs, I made rash decisions that hurt my daughter. I am deeply sorry, Ashley. The post received 4,500 reactions and 600 comments, most of them supportive of me, but many echoing disappointment in her actions. A local parenting group called Boston Moms United even started a thread dissecting Diane's judgment, with threads titled "When Family Turns Against You" and "How to Support Your Grown Children." My father fared only slightly better on Instagram. His verified account, once a quiet showcase of Tesla road trips and golf outings, began blowing up with tags like @BostonGlobe and @LocalNews. They attempted a carefully worded apology video on Instagram stories, each clip limited to 15 seconds. In the first, Dad stood awkwardly in the front yard, behind the "For Restoration" sign I'd arranged. "Hi, Michael Miller, I know I hurt my daughter. I got the numbers wrong on insurance coverage." A sudden cut, then Mom. "I let fear cloud my love. I never intended to erase Ashley's inheritance." Between them, the series of short confessions accumulated 25,000 views and 1,200 replies. One well-known Boston influencer reposted their apology with the caption, "Real talk, parents owe it to their kids to communicate, not litigate." Within hours, the apology clips had been reshared over 300 times on TikTok, each tagged with supportive comments and GIFs of Oprah nodding. That same morning, a community petition appeared online calling for an official Restoration Oversight Committee, composed of local historians, architects, and neighbors to monitor the funds. It garnered 500 signatures in 6 hours. My parents, who'd once prided themselves on privacy, were now publicly scrutinized for every line item in their bank statements. News outlets dug up the Excel sheet my mother had emailed me. It was now a meme, complete with side-by-side captions, "What she sent me" versus "What Grandma meant." The tipping point came when my Aunt Patricia, armed with Grandma's attorney letters, spoke to the Boston Herald. In a front-page interview, she alleged that Diane had consulted a probate lawyer in January without informing the rest of the family. She called it a betrayal of trust and love. The article quoted Grandma's handwritten note, "Ashley, you are the keeper of our legacy." In print, those words landed like a hammer blow. Social media exploded with calls for accountability, keep Grandma's legacy, and justice for Ashley, trended nationwide for 24 hours. Under mounting pressure, my parents were invited to a televised town hall on Boston 5 News. The anchor, Jake Reynolds, began with measured empathy. "Your story touched hearts, but many viewers want to know, why did you escalate to locks and legal amendments before a family meeting?" Diane's voice quivered as she answered, "We were overwhelmed and poorly advised. We never meant to lock her out physically, only legally." Michael added, "I regret not picking up the phone more. I can't undo what I did, but I'm committed to making it right." After the segment aired, the station's online comments section glowed with over 2,000 supportive messages for me and scathing critiques of their parents' tactics. "Cancel culture meets family culture," one comment read. "They weaponized love for numbers." Meanwhile, I prepared for the upcoming full hearing, but I couldn't help noticing a shift in my parents' demeanor. They called me that evening, something they hadn't done with any sincerity since the eviction. Over speakerphone, Diane's voice broke. "Ashley, I've unlisted the budget email and deleted those voicemail drafts. I've posted your grandmother's journal excerpt on my feed with credit to you. We want you to lead the restoration committee." I listened as Michael added, "We'll match 10,000 USD in volunteer labor costs and set up a fundraiser for any shortfall. You deserve that much." Their words still felt foreign, but I recognized genuine remorse beneath the public pressure. I accepted their offer conditionally. I'd integrate them into the Restoration Oversight Committee under Patricia's guidance, ensuring Grandma's wishes remained paramount. They agreed immediately, promising transparency in every step. 2 days later, we convened for what felt like a truce banquet in the restored sunroom. Over pumpkin-spiced latte cake, I presented the first draft of the Restoration Charter, complete with phased budgets, volunteer roles, and community events. My parents sat beside me, not on the defensive but as partners. They asked informed questions about subcontractor bids, asked to learn how to select fabric swatches, even offered to manage the social media updates. In that moment, I realized their downfall had come not from malice, but from poor communication and fear. The public backlash had forced them to face their mistakes, but it was their willingness to change that repaired our bond. As they toasted to Grandma and to new beginnings, I felt the full circle of our journey. From the shock of betrayal to the redemption of partnership, guided by the unwavering legacy we all shared. And though the world had watched their public unraveling, it was the private rebuilding of trust that marked the true culmination of their downfall and our collective rise. When the final hearing concluded 2 weeks later, I walked out of the Suffolk County Courthouse feeling lighter than I had in months. Judge Murray formalized what we already knew in our hearts. The original trust would stand, the restoration fund would be used solely for the house as Grandma intended, and I would retain co-trustee status alongside my parents, under the oversight of Aunt Patricia. In that moment, I realized the real victory wasn't just legal, it was the restoration of our family's trust and the affirmation of my own worth. Back on Elm Street, the air was crisp with early autumn. The scaffolding had come down from the facade, revealing freshly restored gingerbread trim and repointed brickwork. Volunteers painted the bay window frames in a soft cream that matched Grandma's original palette. I stood on the wraparound porch, notebook in hand, ticking off the final items on our punch list. My parents arrived with coffee, mine black, theirs laced with cream, and we stood together, watching the last crew replace the antique porch light. "Looks perfect," Dad murmured, his usual stoicism giving way to genuine pride. Mom smiled, her eyes glistening. "Your grandmother would be proud." I tilted my head, studying the restored woodwork and the brass kickplate on the front door, engraved with E. Harper, 1892. In that simple inscription, I saw the bridge between past and future. I realized that home isn't just the address where you hang your hat. It's a living tapestry woven from love, respect, and shared stories. Over the next 2 days, we held a private closing celebration in the sunroom. Neighbors, friends, and project volunteers filled the space with laughter and chatter. I baked Grandma's cinnamon-spiced pumpkin muffins in her original electric oven, and the scent curled through the room like a warm embrace. We toured each restored room: the formal parlor with its rebuilt fireplace mantel, the dining room with reupholstered chairs, and the sunroom, reborn into an open studio for design workshops. My heart swelled seeing young design students sketching floor plans on easels, just as I once dreamt on Grandma's stool. In that moment of shared triumph, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. I had set out to defend a trust fund and a legacy, but I emerged with so much more: a clearer understanding of my own resilience and the importance of standing firm in my values. I thought back to the voicemail that had shattered me in Chicago, the Excel spreadsheet that cut deeper than any blade, and the day I found my childhood mementos in the mud. Each painful twist had forced me to confront my own limits and to push beyond them. The lesson I carried home was twofold. First, never underestimate your own voice. If I had swallowed my doubts and remained silent, my grandmother's wishes would have been erased by fear and poor counsel. But by speaking up, whether in a courtroom or on a courthouse step, I protected not only a house, but the very values she entrusted to me. Second, boundaries matter, even with those you love. My parents had crossed mine, but by asserting my right to respect and dialogue, I rebuilt our relationship on firmer ground. Today, when Mom asks my opinion on budget line items, I listen with empathy, and she listens with trust. That evening, as golden light filtered through the stained glass windows, I sat in the sunroom and opened Grandma's leather-bound journal one last time. On the final blank page, I wrote a note of gratitude. To Eleanor M. Harper, thank you for teaching me that home is made of heart, history, and honesty. I promise to guard your legacy and to use this house as a beacon of hope for all who enter. I closed the journal and placed it on the restored mahogany sideboard alongside an heirloom lace table runner that Grandma had embroidered. The room felt complete, an intersection of past grace and future promise. As I locked the front door that night, I paused on the porch, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood. I realized that the greatest renovation hadn't been of the house's walls or floors, but of the walls around my own heart. I had transformed pain into purpose, betrayal into boundary, and chaos into community. In the days that followed, I continued to lead workshops in the sunroom, teaching budding designers about Victorian proportions and modern sustainability. I shared stories of my grandmother's guidance and the legal battle that had nearly uprooted us all, and every time I heard the soft chime of the restored porch light, just as Grandma always left it, I was reminded of the power of perseverance and love. If there's one final takeaway from my journey, it's this: a home is not simply a place, but a promise kept. To ourselves, our ancestors, and the generations yet to come. And as long as we honor that promise with courage, compassion, and clarity, no lock, no amendment, and no fear can ever take it away.